Hello, my name is Kelly Vess, and today I'm going to talk about how I try to keep it real in the digital world when it comes to providing speech and language therapy. So at this time, because of COVID, I am 100% virtual as a speech and language pathologist, and I work with preschoolers. And my struggle is how can I keep these activities educationally rich and at the same time continue to engage the child through a screen at preschool age. So my means of keeping it real in the digital world, I'm going to share with you today, but I'm going to tell you that I always ask myself this question. My litmus test is this: if I were in person, would I be doing this with this child? And if the answer is no, that I'm not going to do it virtually. And I think this is a very important question to ask because a lot of the speech and language therapy that I'm seeing today is looking a lot like something you would see at an arcade or at a Chuck E. Cheese or even at a casino. It's a lot of cause, effect, low level, bells and whistles. And though that might appeal to the child's senses and engage the child on a very low level, it's not doing the child much good in meeting their needs. So it's going to take more work to do things correctly. I liken this to the 50s when they had television dinners and fast food available. And it may have appealed to the senses of the consumer at a very superficial level, but it lacked the nutrients for overall health and for growth. So what I'm going to show you today is how I blend the use of Google Slides and blend the use of music and movement songs with using three-dimensional actual objects and presenting them through a screen to engage the children through variety, but at the same time keep it as real as possible and as educationally rich as possible. So that means I'm not taking on the role of a consumer. I am not simply passively buying video games that target speech and language goals and playing those games for the children. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm taking the role of a chef, and I'm taking the highest quality ingredients that I can and putting together something as educationally rich as possible, despite these challenging times in which we are providing therapy through a computer screen, which is undoubtedly less than ideal. So let me show you very briefly how I would typically put a session together. And of course, this is typically, the session changes depending on the individual child. But as a general rule, I'm going to tell you that through a screen, I have to exude a lot more animation in order to keep the child engaged. So I'm drinking about twice the coffee as I normally would since working virtually. But the animation, I think it's important. You are going through a screen, you're not in person, the child's not receiving tickles, they're not receiving toys. So you've got to make up for it somehow. So almost like a soap opera, we've got to go kind of big. All right. So I typically start the session with a treasure box with magic toys inside. And it could be based on the theme of the week. So the theme this week is senses, or the letter of the week, which is Q. Not much to work with Q. So instead, I'll fill the treasure box with magic toys that engage the senses. And I'm going to pick some really awesome magic toys to start. Something like chips that we can eat. So that the children will talk about the chips. What do we do with the chips? We eat the chips. And what is our mouth for? We use our mouth for eating. We're going to talk about the 5 senses. Go back into my treasure chest. Maybe I'll let them hear it. Can you tell what that is? A lot of drama, a lot of excitement. We are going through a screen here. They don't get to ring the bell themselves. And then we talk about the bell and what do we do with the bell? Do we eat the bell or do we hear the bell? We hear the bell. Whoa. So inside of my treasure box, I'm going to find the most engaging, coolest toys ever that engage the senses to pull out. So now we have to remember that children's attention span is about their age. So if a child's 3 years old, the child probably has a 3-minute attention span, and through a screen, it's probably half that. So after the treasure box, I'm going to go to my Google Slideshow, and I'm going to support that learning with the Google Slides activity. So in my Google Slides activity, I have here a game of how do we lick ice cream, and then the child might say that we use the tongue, then it'll fly up, a little visual. It just provides some variety to the child. Now notice this is the same thing as if I were to use pictures of objects. I really love the Google images, and I like using real images because we need to remember at this time that a lot of museums are closed for children. A lot of opportunities that we enjoyed as children are not available to children. So I love it when I get a good picture of a Komodo dragon, for instance. And I remember seeing the Komodo dragon at the zoo. Like, how great is that? On the Google Images. And I prefer to use, for that reason, Google Images over clip art generally, because I think that the children today are deprived of a lot of wonderful experiences, such as going to museums, such as going to zoos, that we enjoyed as children. It's very sad, but that's where we are right now. So I'm going to, after this activity that's virtual on my Google Slides, I'm going to go back to my 3-dimensional activity. And this time we're going to look at items, for instance, for the senses that are loud versus quiet. And we're going to make some instruments. So in this test tube, I'll have different objects. Oh boy. So once again, the animation level is through the roof. I'm not going to lie, but it tends to work, like a lot of whoa. So I'll tell the children, like, I have keys inside of this test tube. If I shake it, what is your prediction? Is it going to be, and then we'll use the word quiet or loud. So we'll say, is it going to be loud or quiet? So the children will make a prediction, and then we will do our experiment and find out, and then we'll have our conclusion as to whether it's loud or quiet. And then at the end, we're going to categorize it or sort it into the correct compartment. So it's really important to use this scientifically rich vocabulary and use call-outs on the side. So we're going to do an experiment or test it. We're going to make a prediction. What do you think is going to happen? We're going to do a conclusion. We're going to tell what actually happened. So let's give them a leg up for their later learning in elementary school. So that's basically how I sequence. I use real objects, then I use some virtual screen Google Slides. And then we're going to, so there is the, now we're going to go to our virtual screen support. Is the animal loud or quiet? The next activity, then we're going to go back to a real activity. I'll have a bin of water, and we're going to look at sinking, or does it float, or does it quickly sink? And in that activity, we'll have a bin of water. We'll talk about whether something's dense or hollow, whether it's dense and solid. And if it's dense and solid, it's probably going to quickly sink. And if it's hollow, it's probably going to float. I mean, I find this concept just so interesting. If you've ever been on an aircraft carrier or seen one, it's like an island in the water. And that's because of the air, the hollowness of the air, being that it's less dense than the water, and you can carry a whole entire city on the water. It's just fascinating. So we talk about these scientific concepts, and we use the actual terminology, and then we use these call-outs, which is the simple word, 1 to 2 definitions right next to it. So I also incorporate movement songs as well. So in this week's activity, one of the songs will be a gross motor song, and one of them will be a fine motor song. I typically start off with the gross motor. Just see when the body's engaged, the brain will be engaged as well. So here we have the queen has a head, one head, sang to the Matman tune so she can think, and then it goes through all of the senses. So this is gross motor movement. The eyes go like this so that she can see. And then we go into a fine motor song. After that is a movement break. And then we have the 5 little ducks going quack, quack, quack. And they get to use their fingers and counting the ducks. So that's basically, and with every child, I do something different, of course, but that's basically the outline. It's almost like circuit training in which we do the real activities that the child sees on the screen, which will really tax them cognitively and attention-wise. They're seeing this through a screen and their observational skills. And then we'll do something a little bit simpler, through a computer screen and a Google Slide activity, and give them a break and some variety. Then we go back to a real activity, once again, a real observational activity, learning experience. Then we'll go back to Google Slide or movement song. So that's basically how I try to keep it real in the digital world. As the child's attention improves, you're going to see less and less Google Slides, and you're going to see more and more actual objects and activities that I would be doing in person. So I'm with you in this challenge. It's not easy, but I encourage you to not be passive about what's going on right now and not to take the easier route, because the stakes are very high, and the children we work with, their neuroplasticity is at a very, very high level. That hasn't changed, and we're here to make a difference. Okay, and we're going to take the harder route, and in doing so, we're going to change these children's lives. Well, thank you for being with me.